So you can see that there was wheeling and dealing going on with absolutely massive UK defence contracts that were being done through the back door by Mr. Werrity and his organisation Pargav and Pargav Limited. So the major press, which has convinced people in Britain that it's a little bit of maybe slap and tickle between Mr. Fox and his best man, this is a smokescreen, because what has gone on in the background is absolutely massive arms deals. But of course, it's also exposed that David Cameron has been levered into power by international arms dealers.
And I mean, as you said, this just opened up a can of worms that never ends. There was another group which was connected to this scandal, which I mentioned at the start. You had Werrity, of course, with Atlantic Bridge, but Atlantic Bridge, one of its main funders is this Israeli BICOM lobbyist groups. And no, from what I can see, no mainstream establishment newspaper has done a story on this astounding revelation, which came out in a leaked email, which was mistakenly sent by BICOM CEO, this Israeli lobby group, to the press. And in this email, Brian, they brazenly boast about how they've penetrated BBC News and Sky News as a means of, quote, ensuring the most objectively favourable line was taken, end quote, in relation to a pro-Israeli stance in the news. Here's another quote in this leaked email. After contact with BICOM media team, Sky News changed their narrative in explaining the prior events in the region which led up to this weekend, and they're talking about the siege on the Israeli embassy back in September. So this group that funds Werrity's Atlantic Bridge, in their own emails, brag about how, I mean, there's another one where they talk about they have a meeting with the BBC News editor. There's another quote where they say, quote, I briefed Jonathan Ford, the Financial Times lead writer, for his upcoming article. I briefed him. It's not that they gave him a quote or an interview. This lobby group is briefing our journalists, BBC, Sky News, Financial Times, on what to report. And they brag about how they made them change their narrative about certain events. And this is the group linked to Werrity's Atlantic Bridge. So, I mean, Brian, we've caught them red-handed. This is how talking points in the media are generated. It's about how they dictate reality to us. So, I mean, what does this say about the so-called impartiality of the likes of the BBC and Sky News, that they're being briefed by pro-Israeli lobby groups?
Well, this is absolutely correct. I'd just like to say at this point, because I think it is an important thing to talk about. We're here talking about Israeli interests. The principal interest for us is what our own ministers are doing intermixing with these people. I can at the moment just sort of put a wall down and say the Israelis, separate country, whatever they want to do, they can get on and do it. We may not agree with all of it, but at the moment in Britain we are focusing on what our own politicians are doing, being bought or directed by these people. When I voted when I have voted in national elections, I don't ever remember voting on a basis that I wanted people who were actually working for Israel coming into my country. Now, the key man in this, Mr. Zabludowicz, was the man who was intimately linked with the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, and he donated some £800,000 to them. So we're not talking about small institutions who are short of a bit of money. We're talking about people who are directing sums of billions of pounds or billions of dollars, and they are capable of buying whole organisations and government, never mind a few individual people. But if you dig into BICOM, you very quickly find Mr. Fox's smiling face at their events. And the other important thing to realise is that this this activity is not related to one party. It's not related to the British Conservative Party, because we've got individuals like Hazel Blear's MP from the Labour side, who's also intimately involved with them. In fact, I can also say that Michael Gove, who's now our Education Secretary, is another man who is happy to come under the BICOM fold. So I think that what we're really starting to ask is who are these people who are now in our Parliament, and who are they working for? And the UK column, we did it as a very measured article, but we ran an article which pointed out that David Cameron said that he would never break his allegiance to Israel. That was above everything. And so we said to him, can you explain to us, Mr. Cameron, how you can be the Prime Minister of Britain, which should be your ultimate responsibility, and in fact what you're saying is that your primary responsibility is to Israel? I believe that what we are seeing, well, I'm sure what we're seeing in the British Parliament at the moment is utter treason, and we need to expose these people for what they really are, which is the spawn of international arms dealers. And of course, what do international arms dealers like? And it's very simple. They like wars and bloodshed because that's how they make their profit. So to now see this I can't really describe him in the right way, this horrible man, Cameron, calling on America to start yet another war to start millions of deaths. I hope that the average American citizen out there, and certainly the people listening to this show, start to think to themselves, we don't need American deaths in order to satisfy Mr. Cameron's personal ambitions.
It's amazing, and I mean, you talk about, we don't vote for people to be influenced by Israeli lobbyists. It doesn't matter what country they come from. Russian lobbyists, any kind of outside influence whatsoever, it's a violation of sovereignty. It's the complete opposite of representational democracy, and it's got no business being in our country. I mean, this Lorna Fitzsimmons of this BICOM group, she bragged it. I mean, these quotes just keep coming. Quote, public opinion does not influence foreign policy in Britain. Foreign policy is an elite issue. So that again goes to the core of what you're saying with these people. Outsiders coming in and directing our foreign policy at odds to what the British people actually want.
Yep.
Switching gears, Brian, though, yeah. And I want to get onto the child abuse issue in a moment, but we had this big story a couple of months ago. What do you think about YouTube pulling down the video of the protest at Birkenhead where members of your group attempted to arrest the judge due to a, quote, government removal request? That's what YouTube said, and they pulled the video. Well,
just to set the scene for listeners, a few months ago, in a totally peaceful demonstration, 600 people on the streets up in the Midlands in UK. Basically, a judge was arrested for running an unlawful court. Now, of course, the police did what we would expect of the police, which is that the police ended up defending the judge. He wasn't harmed, he wasn't assaulted anyway, but he was simply informed he was being put under arrest by the public because he was running an unlawful court. Now, you're quite right, because video footage of that was taken down with a statement that it was the government taking it down. This is highly significant, and I personally believe it's wonderful, it's excellent, because what it has shown, and people understand the meaning, is the government is terrified of what people can do when they've got proper knowledge and understanding of what's happening in their country. So the British government was so terrified of what 600 peaceful protesters did in Birkenhead near Liverpool that they had to remove the video. Of course, on the day itself, despite 600 people being on the streets, about 40 police vehicles, I don't know how many hundred police with dog handlers and some riot police in the background. On the day, there was not a single report in any of the British mainstream media. The BBC didn't cover it. None of the ITV, the independent channels, covered it. There was simply one local radio station that published what had happened. Now, this was obviously a media clampdown. And why would you need a media clampdown? Because the government is terrified of the truth coming out about the corruption in British courts and the fact that ordinary people are now starting to move to sort the problem out themselves. So that's what it's about.
As he said, I mean, it just represents to me how much of a blind panic they're in, that they have to remove this video from the internet. And their excuse is, oh, you can't show footage of a court in session. I mean, the court wasn't even in session, and most of the video was of the protest outside. So again, that was just an excuse. And I mean, doesn't it show the fact that they're petrified of people understanding how, in this example, Roger Hayes, with the whole council tax issue, people can beat them at their own game. And I mean, that really goes to the heart of why they're so afraid, because if everyone else learns about how people are being successful in fighting it, then it's rapidly going to get out of control from their perspective.
Well, I think, Paul, that I know the Alex Jones show is pushing out a lot of good information for people about what is actually happening, and we are trying to do the same. But I think something very, very interesting has happened in the last 6 months. You can now feel, you can see, if you're looking in the right place, that we are starting, this is all the people, thousands, millions of people who are starting to wake up. We are now starting to drive our own governments because they also know people are waking up, and that is why we're suddenly seeing the rush through of all this very hard-hitting, draconian legislation to clamp down on American people and to clamp down on British people. They are now going flat out to introduce the dictatorships in Britain and America, and the reason they're having to rush is because of the rate we are now exposing what they're doing. And the beauty is, the more they do and the faster they do it, the more obvious it is to people that something is very wrong. So I think we, as well as getting out the message of all the terrible things that are happening at the moment, we've also very much got to focus on the positive things and where we're having successes. And one of the things that we know in Britain is we can't get justice, we can't bring treasonous politicians to justice because the courts are utterly corrupt. And one British MP called John Hemming, who came to an event we put on the weekend before last, was happy to stand on stage and be filmed saying that the British courts and judiciary are corrupt. So we've got to deal with these corrupt courts and these corrupt judges if we are going to get democracy and proper law and order restored in our country.
And that tipping point is going to be more likely the more the number of insiders, like the MP you just mentioned, come out and speak out against that. But I mean, readers of the UK column are well aware of, switching gears for the next topic, the fact that you've covered this serial state kidnapping of children for years now. And for our American audience, if you think the CPS is bad in the United States, then this certainly rivals it. We're talking about no court order, barely any legal process in many cases. Police, from the stories I read, literally hunting down cars in the middle of the night to snatch babies from parents. I mean, Brian, we've read cases in the media about, taking so-called obese children from parents, and the media will report on that at length. But what you've reported in the UK column is something that can only represent a deliberate assault on the family unit by the state with these kind of child kidnappings, child abduction, and eventually child abuse. I mean, tell us why this is happening in the UK and why it's so prevalent.